Hello, and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in work and in life and simplify them. And today's, we're talking a little bit about ERGs. Now, wait, do you know what an ERG is? It's an employee resource group, and it's most times in most organizations that are larger, it's a way to create true community and belonging. So, we're going to break that down. How do you create impactful ERGs for your organization? And I'd like to introduce to you somebody who I think is the absolute expert on this in the DFW area. His name is Kenny Braxton. He's been in the human resources space for over 20 years, and he's most currently serving as the Director of Inclusion, Diversity, and Talent Acquisition for HF Sinclair since 2013. Now, why do I say that he's the best? Well, I am joined by many other people who agree that he's the best. He was awarded the DEI Leader of the Year 2023 by Dallas HR, one of the largest SHRM chapters in the US. He's also the founder of the Veterans in Energy ERG. Since then, has oversaw 5 ERGs at HF Sinclair. So I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Kenny Braxton. Hey, Kenny.
Hey, Mary, what an honor to be on a show with the undercover superhero. Thank you for inviting me.
You know what? I love these conversations because you know what? I find that there are things out there in the world that people talk about and they seem super complex, but I like to talk to the thought leaders that are simplifying it, make it really simple and easy and tangible for you to try out in your own organization. So that's why we got you here.
Thank you.
So I'd like for you just to start off as a base level, define an ERG in today's workplace. And why are these important, especially for larger organizations?
Well, I think the reason I'll first answer why it's important for large organizations, but I would say for large or small organizations, employees need to have a safe place to land. I also feel like they need a community that shares the same passion and interests as them. And it
Yeah.
needs to be out of the day-to-day mundane. Let's pull together a spreadsheet and let's flip around on PowerPoint slides, but something that's meaningful to them outside of their day-to-day work. Let's be honest. I mean, the main job as an employer is to ensure they have benefits and pay. But after that, what happens in between pay periods, right?
Yeah.
So these are things, I mean, we grew up with it, right? When we were in grade school, we had sports and PE and field day. So to me, it's just a corporate adult way of having those things.
It's interesting to put it that way. I haven't really thought about it, but yeah, my kids are in extracurricular activities with people that are, they like-minded and have like interests, and it gives them a social outlet. It builds community, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And it also
I
helps
would
them.
also say it. I'm
It helps.
sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and it also helps them, kind of find out who they are and their personality. You start to learn from each other as well, right?
Yeah, I think you learn from each other. It's a retention tool. It allows exposure that maybe you may have not had the opportunity to avail yourself to. It also develops character and leadership skills.
Yeah. So tell us, at HF Sinclair, you've been there well over a decade now. You guys have got a robust ERG program for your employees, and what you have 5,000 employees around the US, correct? So give us a little bit of
To
an,
be clear, it's
yeah.
globally. We have 5,000 employees globally.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying. So tell me a brief overview of the different types of ERGs you guys have currently.
So we have the Women's in Energy, ERG. We have Veterans in Energy. We have Family Caretakers in Energy, Cultural
Mhm.
Awareness in Energy, and Toastmasters in Energy.
Brilliant. And I want to dive deeper into this family caregivers ERG that you guys have championed over at HS Sinclair. Tell me more about how that one came to be and where the need was from the employee side.
Well, it came from a particular employee that came to me and she said, have we ever thought about having any kind of program for working parents? And I asked her to unpack that. So we had several unpacking meetings. And at some point, we talked about it being bigger than just parents, that a
Mm.
lot of us have loved ones that we're responsible for taking care of before and after we come to work. It could be an aging parent, it could be a disabled spouse, and of course, it's parents. But let's be honest, we come to work day to day and day in and day out with weights. And I know that when you say weights, that sounds like you're bringing in a negative connotation, but the truth of the matter is we come in very heavy at work. And a lot of that is derived from what we deal with before and after. So, how can we make life better for these people that have these, what I would argue is, say, bigger job and bigger tasks than what we get paid for? So we started a conversation with that, and it led to providing resources where this particular employee resource group acts more as a support group for people that are in similar situations. It also, outside of just resources, it brings to light things that are already in place that we offer as an organization, like EAP program,
Yeah.
that you probably already know. You start unlocking that door, and there's just volumes and volumes of resources that help you with your outside life. And unfortunately, a lot of people think EAP, oh, that's for counseling. I don't have any problems. That's mental health benefit. And it's really not. I mean, EAP helps with daycare issues, legal issues, financial issues. So that's another part of the process and part of the package that this group has been diving into. To be clear, they began probably about 8 or 9 months ago. So they're still building up what it's going to look like. But the vision, once we get there, and I don't know if you ever get there, but once we start burning calories on this thing, it's really going to be a resource for, I would say, more than 80% of our workforce that is taking care of loved ones.
And that's the piece that I want to talk about, is that it's sort of the hidden thing that is really affecting a good majority of your workforce. And I just really want to applaud you and the volunteers behind the ERG to see it and to notice it and say, well, how do I create belonging and support for that group, which is actually a large sector of your workforce? I think it's very smart.
Thank you. No, we're really excited about it. Again, we're still learning and growing, but I'm excited about it. I'm someone that behind the veil, a lot of people didn't know my story. So I have a 22-year-old son that was born with a very unique disability. When he was born, we were told only 60 babies a year are born with what is called cri shy. It's spelled Cridchat, and it's a French word that means cry the cat. And you want to talk about just having a hard time finding daycares or babysitters that not only were equipped, that even if they were equipped, were open to taking him. So
Mm.
there were a lot of sacrifices I had to make. Now, I'm one that I would say I was lucky raising him. I always had a very understanding and compassionate leader. But the truth of the matter is, not every company is going to be like that. Not every leader is going to be like that. And to be fair, not every organization is equipped for that level of patience and that level of compassion that was really required in the 18, 19 years I raised my son.
Yeah. And, I think that it's worth saying out loud. When you have a child who has special needs, it's not as if those special needs end when they turn 18 or 21. I mean, a lot of times, parents of special needs children then still have special needs adults living with them at home full time because they need that extra support as they gain more independence and autonomy in the world. It doesn't just end when, they've graduated high school and okay, they're off to college. It's not the same story for some, right?
100%.
And that requires that compassion. That requires that understanding from, your employers. And I think I dare say, and I am curious if you've come across this even prior to your current role. I think a lot of times corporate America is all about the numbers. It's all about the bottom line. Have we hit our revenue numbers? Do we hit our KPIs? If we're not, then there's something wrong with our productivity, and we need to replace those people with more productive people, right? And so that we can hit those numbers and look great for shareholders. Is that a fair statement? I mean, from what
Yeah.
you've seen in your career?
From a broad perspective, absolutely.
And it's heartbreaking. I think that there is a shift in the marketplace. I'd like to believe amazing HR thought leaders that both you and I have come across in our career as well. There's a shift to a more compassionate workplace that in fact increases productivity and helps people hit revenue numbers in the bottom line with just a little bit of support and care like this as well, right?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think the days of the cookie cutter leadership approach is gone. And if you're still practicing that model, I would say that you're probably going to be left behind. I mean, we are
Mm-hmm.
in a space and time now where you definitely have to have a different approach with each individual employee you have and recognize that each individual employee you have brings something very unique. And with that unique talent also brings unique challenges that you have to be prepared to lead and manage as well.
Yeah. And so I want to break this down because I think it's actually great that the family caregivers ERG is kind of in its infancy. So give us some thoughts and ideas. Where would you start as the very best way to create an ERG from the ground up? What are the basic steps for the first few steps for someone listening?
Well, I think like anything else you start with the why. Why are we doing this? Why is this important to us? And then the what. What are we going to do? So a lot of times those questions, and oftentimes I will say every time at our organization, that that question, those two questions are answered with a vision and mission statement and objective. So when a group of employees comes to me and they say, "Hey, we want to have this ERG," I ensure that they have answered those questions. Also, it's very easy to find if you Google it, but there's this chart called, or it's like a graph called the diversity wheel. We want to make sure that whatever their ERG is that they're proposing, it fits within a dimension of diversity. If you pull that diversity wheel, you'll see there's over 22 dimensions of diversity. So it has to fit within that. The next thing is going back to what are you going to do? I would also say who's going to do it, right? So who are the leaders in your group?
Mm-hmm. 100%. And talking about defining the mission and the vision, you're aligning it to the company's mission and vision as well. But what you're wanting to create a mission and vision for this ERG. Why does this ERG for women in tech or LGBTQIA? Why does it exist, and what is its purpose? Right?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up in terms of fitting of business initiatives because where the executive ally or sponsor comes in is they
Yeah.
help drive the ERG and ensure that everything that they're doing and everything that they write out for their vision and mission fits within our business objectives.
100%. And I think that also speaks to employer branding because think about it from a talent acquisition point of view. When I am looking at companies that I want to apply for roles, this is the very first thing that I look for is tell me about the culture, tell me about the employee resource groups that you have. Before I ever go to apply for a job or even look at their job board, is I want to know about the company first. And in essence, this is a large part of it, right?
Yeah, and it's funny you bring that up because before I got involved in the ERG space, I would tell you that I couldn't really completely articulate the meaning or why or answer any of those questions about ERGs. But
Mm.
once I started getting some experience under my belt and being a leader in talent acquisition and going to college campuses or conferences, job seekers ask about this more than you would think. So now what we've done, we've certainly incorporated it into our recruiting approach, but also from day one, when you're a new hire, we reinforce the fact that these ERGs are out here. And we reinforce if you have an idea of an ERG that doesn't currently exist, bring your ideas to us and we'll listen.
It really makes me think about Gen Z as well as Gen Alpha. These are the kids and young adults who were really affected during the pandemic. During some key social building skills years were kept at home and sheltered from others as much. And I really feel like employers that have a rising workforce in Gen Z and eventually in Alpha have got to have their finger on the pulse on this because this is what creates that socialization inside the organization. I think it's important, regardless if you are an in-person organization, hybrid, or remote, but especially remote, because I feel like there's a certain level of responsibility from the employer side to help these rising talent with the lack of social skills they might have, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, again, employees want something to do, but what better place than somewhere where they can engage employees that have their same interest, and I would even say their same curiosities. Maybe I'll give you an example. I was one of the first males involved in the Women in Energy Employee Resource Group. And a lot of that came from, I haven't walked this same walk and probably never will, but how can I support? So that's
Yes.
important as well to ensure that there's a space for people that are curious to learn more.
Yeah, and that's allyship and at its greatest. And when you can expand your mindset and learn more about others who have a different background, I think about like neurodiversity or disabilities or veterans, for example. And you may not have those things. I think it's a place for education. It's a place for community, and it's a place for, I mean, bottom line inclusion across the board. So I just want to recap what you said there. Got to have an executive sponsor. Work towards, making sure that the mission and vision for the ERG itself is also aligned with the business. But also talk to me a little bit about kind of writing a charter, or governance, or these are volunteer run mostly, right?
Yeah, it is. And that's important too. So probably outside of the charter, one of the questions are, or not really questions, things that I share with any group of employees that come to me and they say, we want to have a ERG. We're about to write a charter. I
Hmm.
remind them of the importance of being consistent with it because they don't get paid for it. So they really need to count out the cost. And it's a big deal. Like our veterans group in the fall, a big a handful of employees, they go and they clean at cemeteries.
Mm.
During Memorial Day, a lot of our employees give up their entire Memorial Day weekend to serve. So it's a big deal. And I think employees need to understand what it means. It's not a clique, it's not a club. I know
Yeah.
I painted a picture earlier, gave you an illustration about field day, but I would argue that it's a little more bigger than that. It's just not a one day thing. It's an everyday thing.
Yeah.
So employees really need to understand the commitment. When I think about mistakes I made in the beginning when I started leading these ERGs, it was not really setting boundaries or even terms for leaders.
Mm.
I was just so happy people wanted to jump in and lead and be involved. I didn't think about, what's going to happen when folks get burnt out. So now that this space is matured in our organization, I have set terms for people that are leading because I think the approach should be like any business model, right? When you have an org structure, you should be thinking succession planning. You should always be grooming future leaders. So that's a big thing too with employee resource groups to ensure that someone is ready to step in when someone is ready to fall off and turn to something else.
That is very smart advice. And think about it. You're also teaching people how to be great people leaders. I mean, every people leader in your organization needs to have solid skills in understanding succession planning, coaching and mentoring, and building the next generation up. I mean, what a great way to reinforce that through the ERGs as well. And I think we hit on it a little bit, but I really want to go back to this. What is one common mistake that HR professionals make when they're running these ERGs? What's your primary mistake that you see?
For HR professionals, I would say being too involved.
Hmm.
Again, I mean, there certainly should be some oversight, right, from an HR advisory perspective. But
Yes.
if it turns into a an offshoot or a component of the HR department instead of really being employee led, managed, and driven, then it's not going to be sustainable. It's just going to be the next new HR initiative. and no slam to my HR professionals and counterparts out there, but I think it could possibly die with too much of us being in the middle of it.
That is so true. And I think most HR people that I've met come with good heart and good intentions, right? They're people who love people mostly, right? But I think HR sometimes gets a bad rap. You know, they see HR's stamp on it and they go, oh, there's some hidden agenda underneath this, or that I don't really want to do this. Is this mandatory, et cetera, et cetera? It's the wrong approach. These ERGs really must be employee driven because it's birthed out of the employee's need, right? And HR, I would imagine you go to bat with executives and say, this is how much I need to an investment
Right.
to run this program. This is where I see us now, and this is where I see us in 3 years from now. And to set that vision and allocate resources. But then, yeah, like be there for the boundaries and bumpers on the bowling lane, but then ultimately let the people run the thing that they need the most, right?
Absolutely correct.
Yeah. And I like that you said earlier about being cognizant of burnout because ultimately this isn't the employee's primary job, right? It's not what their salary and their paycheck is going towards, but it needs to be a complement to the work that they do. Again, as a cyclical learning environment as well.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed watching how it has set the stage for employees that otherwise may have not been recognized, or maybe before they were involved, didn't even aspire to be leaders in the organization. But through their activities, we've literally had, I could think of two or three of them that before being involved in our ERGs from a leadership standpoint, may have not even come up in conversations to be one of our rising leaders, and now they
Mm.
are simply because of the exposure that they gained during the process, but even the things they learned, like I was talking about earlier, org structure, managing a budget, uh, managing employees, leading a
Mhm.
project, all these things allow a space where you could step up and stand out. And that's been the most exciting thing for me, just seeing people be able to rise out of the shadows and really make a difference and move the needle in our organization.
I love it. I mean, from a leadership development point of view, 100%, it should be an integral piece that is supporting that individual contributors rise in the company and building their confidence as well. What are some other best practices that you would share when it comes to ERGs that's really helped you and your team to build a sense of community at your company?
I think we're just now getting into it, but learning what the best practices are outside of our organization. And I
Asking
think that
others.
once you
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Once you get established internally, it's time to seek outside resources. So we haven't done a lot of that. We're starting to do that. And I tell you that just because of, admittedly my role before being tapped on the shoulder to lead our inclusion and diversity program here at my organization. I mean, it was something I was passionate about, but it wasn't something that I will flat out tell you I was educated in or had years of experience under my belt. So one of the things I've learned, and I know that I've heard you ask other guests, what's your secret sauce or what's your superpower? But I would say with the superpower or passion, I'm a man of that believes in the Bible. I'm a Bible man, and I think about somewhere in Timothy where it says, "Study and show yourself approved." So you could be really dangerous and important once you marry up the education piece with the passion piece. So I think we are in the beginning stages of starting that journey to brush arms with other organizations, avail ourselves to other outside tools and resources, whether it's a conference, whether it's a coffee chat or a roundtable, just to learn what other organizations are doing to be sustainable and impactful in their communities.
I love that. I mean, even just last week, we had Daniel Stokes on. He was a former people and culture event planner over at Brex and Meta. And he was talking to me about this gal named Maceo Owens, who runs the ERG movement. Incredible public speaker. She's doing a big tour around the US and she's actually coming to Dallas June 21st. I'll put the link in the show notes if everybody is curious about it. free event. It's happening at the Intuit offices in Plano. It's definitely one that I think would be great to attend. But yeah, the simplifiers.com, that's where you find the show notes for this one and all the links. Another thing that you and I talked about offline was the importance of getting all of your ERGs together at least one or two times a year. Why is that important?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Number one, I think that demonstrates community. You birth and develop collaboration skills, but also, again, going back to the fact that this is a volunteer thing. Like, no one really gets a paycheck for this, right? So
Mhm.
there's going to be times where you have a lot of representation with one ERG and maybe not with the other. So there's just volumes and volumes of things that make this important. But I think also our employee resource groups understanding that why they probably represent different dimensions of diversity, their journeys are almost the same. Some of
Mm.
their struggles are almost the same. The things that they have to overcome and the things that they celebrate and win are almost the same. But what they learn is the way they get those wins and come out of those struggles is with one another. So I love one of my favorite things we did as an organization in the ERG space. A couple of years ago, we had the first Hispanic female general from the U.S. Marines speak during Memorial Day. So Memorial Day is typically our programs are an event that the Veterans and Energy Group uh, sponsors, but we brought in the Women in Energies group to come together. And let's face it, a lot of times veteran groups are known as this men's club. So to bring, because you just don't have as much representation from the female population, which we're working on that. We're starting to see more of our female employees get involved. But that was just really inspiring to me to see the veterans group and the women's group come together for such a meaningful holiday and cause.
And I think that's so smart because, well, first off, you're sharing resources. You're helping these groups come together because ultimately that's what's also important as well is how do you, with your unique interests and background, are you able to integrate into and be feel included into the greater company? And that's a perfect visual way to remind everybody it's not about being this little group that's sort of over here in the side. It's like, no, we're making this thing to help you and help you be part of the greater good as well, right?
Absolutely.
So, Kenny, I am so pleased at the work that you do over there. And I feel like we could talk for hours, but I have to cut it short, unfortunately. But if you guys are curious about what Kenny's doing over at HF Sinclair, you can go to the show notes, thesimplifiers.com, and link up with him via LinkedIn and also through their company website. You can see their employer branding and all the resources online as well. Also, want to remind the folks you're going to be featured on a fellow Dallas podcast, Life in the Leadership Lane, which is on releasing on April 27th and hosted and produced by Bruce Waller. So I'm excited to listen to that one, and we'll make sure to link people up to that show as well. So as we wrap up, a few questions that I like to ask everybody. First off, what is one book or blog that you're reading these days that's either inspiring you or poking holes and challenging your belief system?
Right now, I'm reading a book called Jackfruit Leadership.
Mm.
And it really, you want to talk about simplifying things, it really just goes back to the basics, and shines a light on leading in the most unique way. And a lot of times it's just how you treat people, right? How you speak to people, and then how to build diverse teams. And what I found in my career, if you are looking for the best talent, and the requirements of the job, at some point you're going to find diversity. So what I like so much about this book is it really just pulls us back to the basics. The truth of the matter is, I think in this upper echelon world, we've gotten away from that. So this book is really just taking me back. It's reminding me there's things I'm highlighting and kind of slapping myself on the shoulder. Wake up, Kenny. Did you forget about this? I love it. It's a great book. The author is Dana Dillard.
Love it. I have not heard about this book, so this is exciting for me. I will link it up in the show notes if you guys are curious to check it out, thesimplifiers.com. So tell me, who's one person you recommend that we should shine a spotlight on who's doing amazing things out in the world? And maybe, who knows, one day we'll have them on the podcast.
So that's the author of Jackfruit Leadership, Dana Dillard. So
Awesome.
full disclosure, Dana Dillard was a hiring leader at a company I worked for over 15 years ago when I was in the mortgage space and I was a recruiter there. And just watching, I mean, she was doing inclusion work before it was a sexy car on the lot and a toy to play with. Like her hiring approach, her leadership approach was something that from the HR perspective, me being a support to her, I was just really inspired by her. And at some point, she became an executive in the inclusion space, and now she's a consultant that recently wrote this book that I'm reading now. So, anyone that hasn't heard of Dana Dillard or availed yourself to Jackfruit Leadership, I really would encourage you to do so.
Brilliant.
It's a
Yeah.
treat.
And it's amazing when you think about those thought leaders out there that might just be ahead of the curve with most people, but that's how we make change, right? That's how we ripple a different way of looking at things that is better for all, not just better for the organization. So I believe gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell me, what's one thing you're grateful for today?
When I think about what I'm grateful for, I would say every peak and valley in my personal life and my professional life. I've been able to learn from both. I mean, we enjoy the peaks. That's the fun stuff, right?
Mm.
But then when I think about the valleys and mistakes and some of those times where I had to fight through adversity, I'm so grateful for those. One of the things you'll hear me say a lot is shortcuts are expensive. And I'm so glad that in my personal life and my professional life, I was able to go through all the tweaks and turns to get to where I'm at now.
I love that. So, someone somewhere is listening to you and I right now, and maybe they're trying to get a fledgling ERG group up off the ground, or maybe they're just feeling really isolated in their company and don't really know how to build community and find that sense of belonging, feeling a little discouraged. What's one thing you could whisper into their ear right now just to encourage them in this moment?
So it's one thing, but it's three things I'd like to say. And I would say show up, speak up, and sync up. Don't
Yes.
be afraid to say something.
Yeah. Kenny, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you.
It's been a lot of fun and an honor to be a guest that was invited. So thank you, Mary.